But it's my great pleasure to introduce Danyal, who's come all the way from the UK to give us this talk. We met him in Korea in 2012. So it's good to have you here. And it's good to have your family as well.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for the opportunity that has been given to me to discuss aspects of my PhD research. I'm looking at a sort of interdisciplinary research project which looks at mathematics, education, and language. In a few minutes' time, I think I'll be elaborating on the definition of, what's the definition of language. The way I'm looking at language is a meaning-making resource. It can be verbal, it can be vocal, it can be visual, but the whole point is about meaning-making that I'm interested in and how it's been employed in a mathematical context. More specifically in a bilingual mathematical context. And again, aspects of this sort of seminar, it would bring into light something about, so we're going to learn something about what we do every day that we don't really pay particular attention to it. Things that we see, but we may not know the meaning of it every day, what people do. In a sense, I like this quote basically. I think this quote summarizes my whole presentation. We speak with our vocal organs, but we converse with our whole body. I will say it in a second why. I mean, how many of us guys in the beginning have a crossed arms basically? What's going on? What's happening nowadays? How many of us are playing with our hair basically? Don't worry, I promise you I'm not analyzing your body language. Okay, so I think this quote summarizes my presentation that I'm going to present to you. Again, as I said, I'm doing an interdisciplinary, sometimes a multidisciplinary project that I'm doing. The key terms in this seminar, we're looking at gestures, body language, body-based resources, basically. Mode. Does anyone know what a mode is? Not in a mathematical context, not in a statistics. I remember I was talking to a statistician, we talked about multimodality. And his definition of multimodality was when we got a curve with multiple modes, in a sense, most frequent numbers. But we were talking about the different modes over there. But we'll be describing about what a mode is, the socio-semiotic means of modes. We will be talking about code switching, and of course mathematics. So again, there is an aspect of mathematics education, socio-semiotic theory of semiotics, basically. We'll be talking about psycholinguistic aspect of social linguistics and body language, all incorporated within the teaching and learning of mathematics. Okay, so in a sense, I'll be talking about hands, our hands as gestures, not as tools that are used to build things, but as instruments that present information. Okay, I want to talk to you about the possible relationship between hands and mind in a bilingual mathematical context. Okay, I know it's getting a bit boring to introduce the whole thing, but we'll get through some ideas. But before that, as you can tell, I've got an accent, but I want to tell you how my ideas from my research has evolved with the origins of my past and professional experience. I want to tell you about myself, basically, just a basic introduction. When I was 14 years of age, I came to the UK with no English at all. Okay? It was a bit frustrating being in an English school without being able to communicate through the medium of English.
A bit frustrating.
A lot. But however, that didn't stop me from trying to understand not only what others felt about me, but also try to understand the communicative repertoire and communicative encounters that I found myself in it sometimes. So I tried to understand what people were saying about me and how they felt about me. But again, the problem was I didn't know the English. So how could I do that? I realized that if I walk to a room and if people genuinely like me, they sort of raise their eyebrows with plus 3 slow, repetitive nods, like that. So if my ideas were appreciated, yes, as you can tell, yeah, that makes sense, fantastic. People arch their eyebrows, followed by 3 slow, repetitive nods. Okay, and also if I said something that people appreciated my idea within the context of maths, they did that to me. Fantastic. On the other hand, if I walked into the room that people didn't like me, or if my ideas weren't appreciated, or they didn't like, people sort of squinted their eyes, followed by this defensive mode. And again, arms crossing, there was a whole literature about it. Well, in the beginning of a presentation, oh my god, there's an Iranian looking guy, what is it doing basically here? When we're not, again, an arm cross is a sign of discomfort. When we're not comfortable of a given situation that we're in, we cross our arms. When we're not sure what's going to happen, we cross our arms. When we're not comfortable of something, we squint our eyes, followed by an accompanying of arm cross, basically. And again, so basically I've used aspects of body language to decipher what others were feeling about me and what they were communicating about me. And unfortunately, I couldn't incorporate these aspects into teaching and learning of mathematics because I could. Okay? However, I want to move on. That's just a basic introduction of how the idea of body language became an interest to me when I was a student. But however, how about my professional background? I worked in an inner city school where the proportion of bilingual, multilingual learners should equal monolingual anglophones in the UK. I became aware that when students couldn't convey their meaning using English, they drew upon their semiotic resources. Like, this line, A and B, they're parallel. Yes, that's right. Or the relation between lines Z and X, they're, how do you say it? They're perpendicular. So gestures, they acted as visual amplifiers to what interlocutors were trying to express verbally. But again, not knowing the English caused a lot of frustrations for students of all kinds. And again, these are problems with initial bilingualism stages in everywhere we see, basically. So, and again, from a research point of view, I want to reflect back to what John Mason is talking about. We cannot escape the questions of epistemology and ontology. And in a sense, what I'm doing, or what I'm about to present to you, which is a huge major of my research, is a self-interest driven research. I became adept at, and I became sensitized to aspects of body language, and in a sense I stressed some aspects and consequently I ignored some other features of research. I became interested in body language within, or the language in mathematics, and I became less interested in, for example, reasoning. And again, I would like to acknowledge that, basically. And again, I quite like this picture basically, because this rhino, it reiterates rhinos' orientational, his ontological orientations. That makes the researcher part of what is being researched. That makes the describer to be part of description. Okay? And again, I just wanted to acknowledge my subjectivity, that's my point. Similarly, the ways in which we come to view things varies considerably different from our standpoints, from our social standpoints, from our epistemological positioning, basically. So in a sense, as an individual, we're unique. The way we brought up, the way we perceive the social world, and my point of view varies completely different from somebody else's, from another British Iranian point of view. So I just wanted to sort of reiterate, before I go into describing my rationale for my research and introduce some data, I just wanted to get some understanding of it. Gestures. Why am I so interested about gestures? Gestures are universal in the sense that there hasn't been a report of a specific culture that they don't gesture. People gesture all the time. Okay? People think, people have hands, people gesture. Even when the listener doesn't have a visual access to the gesture. Yes, yeah, the second round, don't take the first roundabout, take the second roundabout. And tell me, when we're on the phone, how embarrassing is it? How many times have you talked to yourself using gestures? When I was preparing this presentation, and going through it, I realized that I'm actually gesturing even though I was talking to myself. So don't be embarrassed, we all gesture at different circumstances. But more interestingly, conversation between blind-born children involves gestures as well. Okay? But the frequency of it is not as high as sighted children, but still, blind-born children, they gesture. That shows some, hardwired system of gesture and thinking and the motor mechanism, which I don't want to go through the actual psycholinguistic part of it, but just a brief idea about it, basically. It is interesting to know that the ways in which gestures are produced is called cross-cultural, and the realization is also cross-cultural as well. Gesture is a mean of meaning, is a mode of meaning making, a mode that is culturally given and socially shaped. Therefore, it's not really surprising that the way we gesture things is different. The way we understand gesture is different in one culture versus another culture.
What is the distinction between production and realization?
Yes, the way we realize, the way we produce gesture is different. That, if I do that to you guys, you'll be fine. If I do it in Iran, I might get a couple of girls' phone numbers, or I might get a slap on the face. The realization is different, basically.
But is reproduction and realization the same?
The way they're produced and the way they realize, that's more of an interpretation of it. So the way I produce the gesture, I've got a meaning which I want to convey to you. I convey that meaning. Again, beneath that is about notion of communication. So I've got something to convey to you. So I use my resources. It could be a verbal resource and it could be a visual resources. With verbal, there is some, up to a certain limit I can convey my meaning to, hence I use my gestures. Okay? So I'm producing something to you. And then it's your turn to realize what my message is, in a sense. So you look at my verbal message, try to make sense of it in relation to the gesture it accompanies. Okay? So it is cross-cultural. Yeah, we'll go through the three examples of it later on. In the beginning, we talked about the notion of language that is involved in mathematical classrooms. And again, I want to extend the notion of language to what Albert Mehrabian, an Iranian-American psychologist, who looks at language in terms of three different structures. It can be verbal, what I say. It could be vocal, how I say it. So we're looking at paralinguistic features like stress and intonation and all that paralinguistic level. And also it can be visual. And again, if you want to quantify it, we got 7, 38, and 55% of components of meaning making are through these structures. It has been criticized, but I don't want to go through the quantitative aspect of it as such. So again, that's why gestures, I think, contribute a lot to the meaning making. I don't know what was on my mind when I wrote that in the beginning, but in order to demonstrate what Albert Mehrabian is sort of saying, the importance of I love you varies considerably different, whether who, what, or whom is addressed. I love you versus I love you versus I love you. Okay. It would be a nice practice for you guys if when you go back home, maybe to try to practice it with your partners. Well, have you ever thought about, is it you, or is that the concept, or is that the addressee that you're paying attention to? And the meaning of that is different. And I'll let you to think about it in the discussion groups. But the meaning of that does vary considerably different. Can I have a volunteer, please? Preferably a woman.
That's your choice.
Yeah, if you can come and stand over here, that would be great. Thank you.
Where's the camera?
I'm going to send a message to her. It can be verbal, it could be vocal, it could be visual, it can be a combination of all. Please tell me if you're convinced to what I'm going to tell. I love you. Are people convinced about the fact that I love her? No? Okay, let's get, that was a word only. Let's get more vocal into it. I love you. Yeah? A bit better.
What do you think, Maria?
I love you. Thank you very much. Gestures.
I think you're privileged by it, but only being the audience.
Wouldn't you wish you were here? Gestures act as visual amplifiers to what person is saying verbally. Parallel, perpendicular. There are mismatches, so we'll talk about them in a bit. But the ways in which we say things and the ways in which we gesture influences what we hear. Not only influences what we hear, influences our way of thinking, influences our responses. I would like another volunteer. Tamsin, your turn.
Get to be a volunteer.
I'm going to ask Tamsin a set of questions. These questions were used probably in 1980s as perception or identity. It's more about the schemata that we use in psychology, so I'm asking you a question you should tell me as soon as possible without thinking it. Like uranium bomb, for example. So, first question, not many people have managed to answer all these questions correctly. Good. First question, what is your name?
Amazon.
Correct. Okay, that is correct. Tamsin, I pretty like this because it is made out of silk. What is it made out of?
You said it was made out of silk.
Silk. What do cows drink?
Milk.
Cows drink milk?
Yes. Yeah.
So, how many of you guys thought it was milk? Cows drink milk? Okay, they could be baby cows, obviously. Okay. So should we give her another chance, maybe? Okay, here come some gestures now. Yeah, ready? So try to be engaged with the questions in your mind as well, okay? Try to answer it in your mind. Here come some gestures. How many animals of each species did Moses have on his ark?
Lots.
I'm glad you never said two. Well, Moses, did he have an ark? He wasn't, it was the Noah. So, it was Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, the point of this little activity is that people don't really pay attention to the verbal. People will pay more attention to the vocal, how it's said, silk, milk, and the gestures. Okay? How many of you guys thought it was two? How many animals of each species did Moses take on his ark? So, it's the way we say things, it's the way we visualize things to the students. Yes, this line, the relation between A and 2 is that they're not only perpendicular to each other, but the fact that they cut each other at 90 degrees angle, which makes it, orthonormal to the basis of it. They're perpendicular, right? Okay, visual amplifiers. So in a sense, gestures help us to create meaning. It could be a false meaning. Okay? Again, Darren Brown, what he does anyone familiar with Darren Brown? He's an English magician or mind reader. He tells you, think of any card, for example, with his gesturing to his face. So you would think, oh, Queen of Spades or Jack of Hearts. So you would choose a card that has face by his representation to his face. Or he would say, choose any card. Choose any color from the deck of cards. So there is a smaller, there is a lower intonation. You like it to choose a smaller colors, like 2, 3, 4, maybe rather than on ace of hearts, for example. So gestures help us to create meaning. It could be a false meaning, it could be an influential meaning, but still, they make us to help. How? How do they help us in creating turn-taking? Remember, in the beginning I said when people didn't like what I said or what they do this. But if people liked what I said, they arch their eyebrows, okay? Plus 3 slow, repetitive nods. But what happens before turn-taking, between two friends? 3 fast nods, basically. So I've got a proposition to make. Okay, it's about Tenzin's time to take over. Before she says a word, she's likely to, by like I'm about 90% likely that she makes, that means, Danyal, shut up, because it's my turn to take over. So these are the non-verbal cues. These are the cues we make. And again, we may be aware of these cues, these signals that we give out. Okay? Okay? Sometimes we may not be able to interpret it, basically, sometimes well. But these are the cues that gives us. Going back to the literature, it maximizes communicative effectiveness between two people. Okay? How many of you guys would prefer to have an interview that is more face-to-face rather than over the phone or preferably Skype? Because people, there is a proximity involved that if I like your idea, move forward. If I don't like your idea, yes, that is interesting. I really think your idea is great because you have my support. You will have my support in every aspect. I think you will be a successful businessman. Can you buy that? Okay, good. Okay. Again, recent literature of gestures within the mathematics education, they look at how gesture is an integral part of communication. Okay? Not only they facilitate language production, but they promote learners' comprehension of a message. The students tend to retain information more when the instructional information is conveyed through a combination of gestures and speech. So gesture and speech, they can convey a lot of rich information so that students would remember, they would retain information more, and it helps them, again, in the comprehension and the language production as well. Specifically, it helps students when the concepts are new or abstract or visual. It reminds me of the concept of orthogonality within concept of mathematics. It's one of the things I could never get it because there is lack of visuals in it than anything else. But hopefully there will be enough gestures for the future when I'll be teaching that concept. Now I want to talk to you about the nature of gestures and speech. Again, beneath all that is a notion of communication. I've got a message and I'm going to send it to you. Okay? Subconsciously or consciously, I decide whether I send this message through gestures or through visuals. So, through gestures or through words. Sometimes gestures does a better job, sometimes words do a better job, basically. Okay? But they're different in nature. Okay? Okay? Materially they're different, okay? And they encode, because they employ such a different form of representations, they encode the meaning differently as well. Okay? Because gestures are visual. Speech, on the other hand, it relies on the codified words and grammatical devices. Okay? So in nature we can't really be sending the same message, the identical message in gesture and in speech. They complement one another. But in reality, the message cannot be identical in both modalities. Research has shown that by Church and Susan Goldin-Miller, where we call instances of where speech and gesture convey overlapping information. They call it speech-gesture matches. Okay, so I can talk about a circle. So I said circle in words. Okay, at the same time I gestured circle. So in a sense, gesture and speech, they convey overlapping information. In co-expressiveness, when gesture and speech join to present the same idea unit, when the semantic content of gesture and speech overlaps a lot, we call it gesture-speech matches. On the other hand, when there is a mismatch between what it said to how its gesticulation is like, we call it mismatches. I remember one time in mathematics lesson, the topic of the lesson was about shapes, including trigonometry. It's about finding the areas, basically. There was a question that the teacher said, okay, what's the area of a triangle? The children writing down to pi r squared, basically. So in words, the teacher said, what's the area of the triangle with him gesturing a circle? To me, that's a gesture-speech mismatch where the two modalities don't convey overlapping informations. Okay? Imagine you're at home, you're watching TV, your favorite TV program, for example, and all of a sudden a football comes through your window. What's the first reaction? You go outside, see what's happening, who's done it? You see a 5-year-old like this. The first question is, did you do that? And the 5-year-old would say, no. Do you buy the fact that you didn't do it? At a very early age, when we were children, probably most cultures that I'm aware of, we've been told, try to avoid seeing bad things, cover your eyes, try to avoid hearing bad things, cover your ears, and try to stop saying bad words. So this guy, this 5-year-old, he tried to stop the bad words from coming out. Yeah. So, in a sense, does everyone familiar with the case of Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky? I did not have sex with that woman. Do you buy that? So basically there is a mismatch between how his body is saying that stop the word from coming out to what the child actually said. That's a mismatch. And again, as adults, of course we lie, okay? We're humans, we lie. We carry the same traits, but in a more intellectual way. So instead of covering our mouth, imagine a second-hand car salesperson. This is a great car, you know, it's fantastic, the aircon works and it's only done 46,000 miles, and it's fantastic. Would you want to buy that car? I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know. Okay, before we get to our first set of activities, is everyone clear about what speech gesture matches and mismatches are, yeah? Good, okay. So I'm going to ask you for a question, 4 questions basically. Please do jump in and talk before we go to our activity. Would you like to tell me whether, question number 1, whether if it's a gesture-speech match or is it a mismatch? Turning a chair was pointing to a chair simultaneously, so chair. Is that a match or a mismatch? Yeah? Good. Fantastic. Okay. Because of the nature of the information that is conveyed through gestures and speech, they can't be identical. With words, I can say what it is, that's a chair, but I can't tell really where it is. So with a pointing gesture, it tells me where the chair has been located, but I can't really be telling you just with a pointing gesture that what exactly it is. So in a sense, the two modalities work together to convey a richer meaning. So chair. Okay. What about this one? Pointing to a chair while saying, "Daddy." Is that a speech gesture match or is that a mismatch? Depends. Okay, would you like to elaborate on that, please?
Daddy used to sit in that chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Because the nature of speech and gesture are different. Okay? It's that is shared. Okay? So the two modalities work to present a joint proposition. That is shared. Basically, that neither modality could convey on its own. That is. Okay? So they can work together to complement the message, basically. They could be matches or they could be mismatches, basically. Either way, the message is conveyed when we pay attention to what we hear and to what we see. Okay? They're very subtle. The next one, I like this example because it sort of builds upon the second question. I went up the stairs. Of making a spiral movement. Okay, it tells me not the fact that I went up the stairs, but how I went up the stairs. It was spiral. I've gone up the stairs. Okay? To me, that's fantastic. It conveys a lot of information. Susan Goldin, I think it is just a great information what she presents here. But the next question, I think I found it of particular interest. Girl at a bar. My Saudi Arabian friend said, no, that's a mismatch because a girl cannot be in a bar. A linguist friend of mine said, hold on a second, that's a question, but there's no question mark. That's not even a question, that's a mismatch, that's not a question. How many times?
Well, what is a gesture in that?
I'll tell you this.
Wait.
How many?
You pose two and answer the third.
Sure, can I borrow you for a second? Can I borrow you for a second?
You have to go there.
Oh, what do you
You have to
mean?
be the volunteer. Yeah.
How many times have you been to a bar where you order a drink, but at the same time, have a sip, please. At the same time, you see a girl? A lot of times, to me. How many times have you had a drink with someone? A lot of times, I would say. Okay. How many times have you been to a bar and you have a drink with the girl who's sitting next to you, and after a few couple of hours, you're asking her, so I'm really glad your company, I really like it. Would you like to come around to my place for a few drinks? And she would say, I'm not that kind of girl. Is that, does everyone understand? Is that a yes? Is that a no? How many times have we lost that opportunity? Okay, so can you see that the speech gesture mismatches? The girl would say she's not that kind of girl, but she's actually signaling yes, I want to come to your place, maybe. Does it make sense? Yeah? Good. Maybe I should have had a picture of a boy, maybe there's more females and they could have helped me out. Okay, so that's a clear example of
Excuse me?
Seems like a nice drink, though.
What I would like you to do is to discuss in the group about instances where instances where you came across a gesture-speech mismatch outside of a mathematics lesson, and also within mathematics lesson. If you could, I'm sure there are more examples of the first kind than of the second kind, basically. For example, the second example was where the teacher said, what's the formula for a triangle? And he gesticulated a circle, basically. That's an example of mismatch within mathematics. So can we try to, we have a few minutes maybe to discuss that, and then we can share some ideas together.